Up until the late 1960s, the Canadian Navy operated a modern aircraft carrier. It had an angled flight deck, steam catapults, and fighter jets. The jets were comparable to land-based aircraft like the CF-100, but could pack a vicious air-to-air punch with their Sidewinder missiles. They were the McDonnell F2HBanshees, Canada's premier sea-based jet fighter. During World War II, Canada operated one of the largest naval fleets in the world. Included in this fleet were two British-built aircraft carriers, HMS Nabob and HMS Puncher. Post-war budget cuts meant that much of this fleet would be scrapped. Recognizing the growing need to monitor trade routes in the North Atlantic, the Navy moved to acquire an aircraft carrier of their own. In 1946, HMCS Warrior was loaned to Canada from Britain, but it proved unsuitable to the harsh Arctic conditions of the North Atlantic. It was replaced by the HMCS Magnificent in 1948. The HMCS Magnificent operated Fairey Fireflies in the anti-submarine warfare role and Hawker Sea Furies in the fighter role. The Sea Furies were an exceptional piston-powered fighter, but they were becoming quickly outclassed by their jet-powered peers. HMCS Magnificent wasn't equipped with the steam catapults necessary to operate the heavier jets, and was transferred back to the Royal Navy in 1956. The Canadian government bought the unfinished British aircraft carrier and sister ship to the Majestic-class HMCS Magnificent, the HMS Powerful, in 1952, for $20 million. The move was aimed at maintaining a potent navy with a strong anti-submarine warfare capability. The carrier, renamed HMCS Bonaventure, but commonly known as Bonnie, was completed by the British to Canadian specifications. This included outfitting it with steam catapults, an angled flight deck, and a mirrored landing system. Although small in size, the modification allowed it to operate heavier jet-powered aircraft. The search was now on for a jet-powered replacement for the Sea Furies. The Canadian Navy didn't really have a lot of good options given the size of their new aircraft carrier. Contemporary carrier-based fighters like the Grumman F9 Cougar, Grumman F9F Panther, Supermarine Attacker, de Havilland Sea Venom, and Hawker Seahawk each had their benefits and limitations. However, the only candidate that would fulfill the RCN's requirement for size, range, armament, and all-weather carrier operations was the Banshee. In 1952, the RCN approved a plan to acquire 60 Banshees, but the final decision would be left to the Canadian Cabinet. They were slow to approve the deal due to fiscal considerations, the effect of which was the order for the new planes came after the production line for the Banshees had already shut down. Canada would now have to wait until mid-1955, when surplus Banshees were released from the American Navy. The order was reduced from 60 aircraft spread across 2 squadrons plus spares to 39. The Banshees were planned to be replaced by 1965, and with the later delivery date, the number of spare aircraft expected to make up for attrition losses was reduced. Canada received 39 used F2H-3 Banshees from the American Navy, which were delivered between November 1955 and June 1958. The single-seat Banshee had a wingspan of 12.42 meters, a length of 11.81 meters, and a height of 4.32 meters. 2 Westinghouse J34WE-34 14.5 kN turbojet engines brought the 5,460 kg fighter up to its top speed of 771 km per hour. It could reach altitudes of 12,500 meters and had a climb rate of 30 meters per second. It could fly 2,760 kilometers in a ferrying configuration, or 1,880 kilometers in a combat configuration. Additional fuel could be carried on removable tip tanks. The Banshee's all-weather capabilities were thanks to the nose-mounted APQ-41 radar. The wings could be folded up to allow it to fit on the elevators that led to the hangar area on board carriers. It was armed with 4 20mm Colt Mark 12 cannons with 250 rounds each. In the ground role, it could carry around 1,360 kilograms of external stores, including bombs and rockets, on 8 underwing pylons. It had a gross takeoff weight of 9,531 kilograms. In the air-to-air role, the Banshee was the first aircraft in Canada to operate air-to-air missiles. They were outfitted with two heat-seeking AIM-9A sidewinders starting in late 1959. In the all-weather interceptor role, the Banshee compares very well to the Canadian-made and land-based CF-100 Canuck. The biggest differences between them was armament and crew. The Banshee was equipped with the highly effective AIM-9A sidewinder, but it was clear sky use only. The Canucks, on the other hand, could deploy their 70mm folding fin rockets to attack in all weather. In case of bad weather, the Banshees would have to fall back on their 20mm cannons. The Canuck also had a second crew member to operate the radar and direct the interception. Workload for the single-seat Banshee pilots was much higher and resulted in reduced combat effectiveness. The F2H-3 also affectionately known as the Banjo, entered service in 1955. First to form was VX-10 Evaluation Squadron for type acceptance. After acceptance, VF-870 and VF-871 squadrons began operating 16 Banshees each. Both squadrons were based out of Naval Air Station HMCS Shearwater in Nova Scotia, when not embarked on the Bonnie. There, they supported the 22nd North American Air Defense Region and worked closely with RCAF Radar Station Beaverbank. On the 16th of March 1959, the two squadrons were merged into VF-870. Pilots from the two squadrons made up the 4 to 6 ship Grey Ghost demonstration team starting in 1956 and flew in air shows across the country. Due to the limited number of aircraft, the team flew operational Banshees painted in their standard livery. The HMCS Bonaventure was commissioned in 1957, and Banshees began flying from her later that year. The Bonnie could carry a complement of 34 aircraft consisting of the Banshees, the Sikorsky HO-4S-3 helicopter, and the CS-2F Tracker anti-submarine aircraft. The introduction of the Tracker was part of the process of refocusing operations onto anti-submarine warfare. The Bonnie would often deploy without her full complement of Banshees in order to carry more trackers. The relatively small size of the carrier made landings challenging. Visiting American pilots often refused to land and flew to bases on shore rather than risking a crash. Even with the challenges, Canadian Banshees were ready 24 hours a day, rain or shine, to defend the fleet against air attack. The HMCS Bonaventure and her fighter wing was at sea during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They helped form the northern end of a picket line that stretched from Cuba all the way into the North Atlantic. Anti-submarine operations were carried out around the clock. Eventually tensions cooled and regular operations resumed. This was the closest the Bonnie and her squadrons had ever come to seeing actual combat. Eventually, the need to operate more and more trackers would force the Banshees out of the Bonnie's hangars for good. By 1962, they had been relegated to shore duty, 3 years before their anticipated retirement. Over its 7-year service, there were 12 crashes, resulting in the tragic loss of 7 pilots. This represented a loss of 30% of the fleet. Causes included a failure in the wing folding mechanism during flight, catapult failures at takeoff, ditchings at sea, and C-fit, or controlled flight into ground, usually caused by pilot inattention or disorientation. The Banshee was retired without replacement in September 1962. While brief, the Banshees were a potent force multiplier with the Royal Canadian Navy during their service. They provided fighter cover to support anti-submarine warfare and training operations all over the world. Their retirement initiated the gradual decline of Canadian naval air power. On July 3, 1970, the HMCS Bonaventure was decommissioned and scrapped in 1971, officially bringing an end to the fixed-wing Canadian naval aviator.